everything you write, you've been on the show before. You're an excellent writer and author, and couldn't encourage people more to pick up your fiction work, but also your nonfiction work here, the Internet Con, which is a really great read, and something I think that could be a great stocking stuffer around the holidays because it's accessible, I think that's a great plus for the book, honestly. And your book pulls no punches. It's really a how-to for destroying big tech, not tweaking it, dismantling it for good. You make that abundantly clear. And why was that so important for you to do?
Well, look, I think we've had a couple of decades of real policy failure around big tech, where we observe these tech barons like Mark Zuckerberg rising to these positions of unelected authority, effectively being the social media czar for 4 billion people for life. And we observe that he is very bad at this job, objectively speaking. And we say, okay, we need to make him better at that job or find someone else to do that job. And so you see things like hateful content rules and rules about other kinds of takedown, copyright infringement, and so on. And all of these just end up making him stronger, right? Because what we say is, oh, you need more power so you can enforce these rules that we are imposing on you. But there's another way to do this, which is to get rid of him, right? To abolish Mark Zuckerberg, abolish big tech, to devolve control of technology to its users. The subtitle of the book is Seize the Means of Computation, right? To let people make their own mistakes, which they will make, but to also have the remedy of going elsewhere or changing the rules for themselves.
Right. And I mean, these tech giants here, you also make it clear that this current construction of the internet didn't have to be this way. Like, there was an alternate vision, but then the tech giants became the tech giants. So, I guess if I were to summarize that in one word, I'd use the word enclosure, perhaps, right? In terms of like the way that these tech giants were able to commodify everything on the internet, which once was like there was a promise of it being much freer and more open. And then if I were to summarize the solution in one word, I'd probably say antitrust. So how'd I do, Cory?
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, not bad, right? I think that you're right that there's this element of enclosure, right? The reduction of the internet into what Tom Eastman calls 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4 was like an actual set of policy choices that had this foreseeable outcome and then produced it. And I'd say that the 2 big policy choices, the one follows from the other, was first to draw down antitrust broadly. We're at the tail end of a 40-year experiment in allowing monopoly formation on the grounds that if everyone is using a single product or service, that probably means that service is something people like, and so we shouldn't do anything to prevent it from forming. And this has produced, across-the-board monopolies. My last nonfiction book with Rebecca Giblin was called Choke Point Capitalism, and is about creative labor markets and really about how creative labor can operate in a market where you have 5 giant publishers, 4 giant studios, 3 giant labels, 2 companies that do all the ad tech, and 1 company that controls all the bookings and live performance venues. And that pattern is replicated across many sectors, from beer to bottle caps, banking to intermodal shipping to professional wrestling and cheerleading. You have between like 1 and 5 companies controlling entire sectors. And so that's definitely true of tech. And the way that you get there is not the great forces of history bearing down on the moment to produce winner-take-all markets, but rather, permissiveness towards predatory acquisitions. So you have a company like Google that made one good product 25 years ago, a search engine, and then everything else they've made internally, almost without exception, has failed. Their RSS readers and their social media platforms and even their own video platform all failed. But nevertheless, they have grown to be a multi-trillion-dollar company by buying and operationalizing other people's companies, video, ad tech, servers, collaboration, maps. All of these are other people's ideas that they bought. And so historically, that would have been prohibited. And we stopped prohibiting that, so companies could grow by acquisition. Apple buys 90 companies a year. Like Tim Cook comes home with a new company for his shareholders more often than you bring a bag of groceries home to your family. But we also let them do predatory pricing. So they sold goods below cost in order to keep new market entrants out, which let them get bigger and bigger. When Amazon tried to buy diapers.com and were told that diapers.com wasn't for sale, they just started offering diapers at below cost. And $100 million in losses later, diapers.com went out of business. Amazon bought them for pennies on the dollar and then shut them down. And now everybody buys their diapers at Amazon. They made back that $100 million loss many times over by doing this predatory pricing. And again, that was illegal until, like, roughly speaking, the Carter or the Reagan administration.
Well, I think
so that's one way that you get.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, Cory, I just wanted to talk about that shift there. I mean, you write about Robert Bork and his influence over this kind of antitrust, I would say, the allowing of monopolies, right? And the consumer welfare philosophy that he embodied. Can you talk a bit about that and that role in the dynamics you describe?
Sure. Approximately speaking, we used to have this standard for antitrust that was grounded in the idea of harmful dominance, that, when a company gets too big, it becomes too big to fail and too big to jail. Some people might have heard of the Sherman Act, the first antitrust act passed in 1890 by Senator John Sherman, who's the brother of Tecumseh Sherman. And when John Sherman was briefing for this law on the Senate floor, he said, if we would not allow a king to rule America, we shouldn't allow an autocrat of trade to determine how we attain the necessities of our lives or work for our wages. And that when a company gets too big, it becomes impossible to discipline, either by competition or by regulation, or, these days, I think we would also understand that it becomes impossible to discipline through labor organizing, that really large companies are able to crush their unions unless you get these heroic measures like we've had just very recently, but which we didn't have for a couple of decades there. And so when we get to the Reagan era, you get this guy, Robert Bork. You might know his name from the expression that is so borked.
Yeah.
Borked as an adjective refers to Robert Bork's disastrous performance during his Senate confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court, which went so badly he never got his seat in the Senate. He had been Richard Nixon's Solicitor General. He was just an all-round creep and white nationalist and just like several kinds of monster.
Right.
But he went on instead to be a kind of court sorcerer to Reagan, along with people like Milton Friedman, with this idea that monopolies are probably good. That when you see a monopoly in the wild, what it tells you is not that a company has managed to dirty trick its way to dominance, but rather that it's done something so incredibly great that people are just buying their stuff there instead of somewhere else. And so the shift to what was called consumer welfare said that you should only break up monopolies or prevent them from forming if you can show that they are either raising prices or lowering costs as a result of their dominance. So not only would you have to observe something like what we have now, where a company called Luxottica Essilor owns every eyewear brand you've ever heard of, Dolce & Gabbana and Bausch & Lomb and whatnot. They also own every store you've ever bought eyeglasses in. They own Sunglass Hut, and they own Lens Crafters and many other store brands. And they own the largest eyewear insurer, and they make more than 50% of the world's optical lenses. And they've raised the price of glasses by 1,000% in the last decade. But Robert Bork would say, no, that's not a harmful monopoly, because maybe they raised the price of glasses because the price of energy went up, or the price of labor went up, or, the moon is in Venus. And so,
or because COVID happened, right? And
or because of COVID, and supply shocks.
Supply shocks, and seemingly, those continue to extend as corporate profits soar and bonuses are back for executives at the highest level. But apparently it's a leftist conspiracy theory that price gouging is...
Yeah, exactly. Greedflation can't possibly be true because we have a model where we have a perfectly spherical economy of uniform density gliding around on a frictionless surface where this could never possibly occur. So Bork says you need to use one of these mathematical models to prove what the origin of this is. And by like an incredible coincidence, everybody who knows how to make and interpret these models is an economist at the University of Chicago who makes them for money. And they always show that nothing bad is going on here and the monopoly is good, actually. So that's part one, right? You get this monopolization and the reduction of choice. But it's not just that, which is why the answer in this book is not just antitrust. The other thing that happens when you have concentration in a sector is regulatory capture. When a sector is composed of hundreds of squabbling companies that are actually competing with one another, they can't agree on a set of regulatory priorities. If you think back to the Napster wars, that was a time when a tech sector that was an order of magnitude larger than the entertainment companies just got its ass handed to it in every single forum. And the way that happened was that there were 7 entertainment companies. And they said the same thing to every judge, every regulator, every lawmaker, every policymaker. And there were hundreds of tech companies, and they couldn't even agree on how to cater a meeting where they would negotiate what that policy would be. Now, today, tech is so concentrated, it's got a Habsburg jaw, and it has totally captured its regulators. And that lets it both under and over-regulate tech. On the one hand, you have an under-regulation where things that would be illegal if you did them without an app become somehow legal if you do them with an app, violating your privacy or your rights as a consumer or your labor rights. And on the other hand, we have over-regulation, where the historic tactics used by tech companies themselves to compete, which is reverse engineering and making interoperable devices. So,
that was going to be my next question. Yeah. I mean, because you focus a lot on I can't say it. Interoperability.
I know, it's hard.
Operability.
And it's not just interoperability, it's adversarial interoperability, which talk about a mouthful.
Yeah. But if you could define that's a really important part of your book.
It really is. Interoperability is just the potential for one thing to work with another thing. Anyone's shoelaces go in your sneakers. Anyone's gas goes in your gas tank. Anyone's butter can go on your bread. And the company doesn't get to tell you whose accessories or components or software or whatever you can use. Today, you have companies that have figured out how to lock you into using their apps with their device, to using their client to access their server, to using their ink with their printer, and so on. And it's not really a technical move. It's not that they have figured out how to make a printer that no one can figure out how to reverse engineer and modify so it can take anyone's ink. Instead, they've gotten a law passed that makes that kind of reverse engineering into a felony. In fact, it's a whole suite of laws that today we just call IP law, but it's this thicket of these very exotic legal theories like anti-circumvention and tortious interference with contract and cybersecurity and so on that can all be overlapped with one another to make it illegal to reverse engineer, modify, repair, or alter devices so that they do what you want them to do and not what the shareholders of the company want them to do. It's what Jay Freeman calls felony contempt of business model. So while Apple was once able to save its bacon when Microsoft was killing the Mac by refusing to upgrade Microsoft Office for the Mac, so if you had a Mac, you just really couldn't read Word or Excel or PowerPoint files that the 95% of the market was offering you because they were all using Windows. And rather than just like begging Bill Gates to fix Office for the Mac, they reverse engineered Office and they made iWork, Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, just perfectly read and write those files so that you didn't have to choose between using a Mac and being able to talk to Windows users. Or when Facebook kicked off, everyone was on MySpace. And they didn't say, oh, come hang out on Facebook and wait for your friends to wise up and join you here the way we're expected to do today if we leave Twitter for Mastodon. What they did was they gave you a bot where if you gave it your login and password, it would visit Facebook or MySpace several times a day, pretend to be you, get everything waiting for you, and pop them in your inbox on Facebook so that you didn't have to choose between the people you loved on MySpace and the service you preferred on Facebook. Today, if you tried to do that to Facebook or Twitter or Apple, they would bomb you till the rubble bounced. They reduce you to a radioactive crater by saying you were a tortious interferer with contract, that you violated Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, you violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So this felony contempt of business model prevents you from doing unto them what they did unto the companies that came before them. And this is how you end up with companies that have this winner-take-all market. Right? It's not just that they were able to buy their competitors. It's not just that they were able to use predatory pricing. It's not just that they were able to cheat you on your privacy, labor, and consumer rights. It's also that they prevent you from mobilizing technology in your service to allow you to block the parts of the product that you don't like and use the part that you do. Half of the web is using an ad blocker. zero app users are using an ad blocker because reverse engineering the app is a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine under Section 1201 of the DMCA. An app is just a web page that's been wrapped in just enough IP to make it a crime to adapt it so that it doesn't violate your privacy.